for joining us today in this session. When Hannah and Dan and I kind of started to think about this, it was kind of reactionary to ways that we can maybe serve students in our own building as we kind of saw a more and more diverse population of students. And so we thought we'd kind of put this together for originally our staff, but then to share out with other folks about how we all might be able to take just some small steps, because there's so much to learn about folks' identity, but to be able to take some small steps to just better understand how the various identities that our students, the folks we serve, our colleagues, as well as ourselves, inform our own experiences, and then how we can use those to use that understanding to create a more inclusive environment and welcoming environment for everyone. I think to start us off, Hannah will, oh yeah, some introductions. I'm sorry, forgot those. I apologize. My name is James. I'm the lead teacher here at the Excel Center Shadeland. And I've been here, this is my 6th year teaching at the Excel Center and my 3rd year as a lead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dea Hernandez. I am a coach at the Excel Center Shadeland as well. And I have been here for almost 4 years now.
And my name is Hannah Wannemuller. I'm also a life coach. I think James and I started around the same time, and definitely excited to share this with you guys. I feel like I have learned a lot just about how to use some of these things and make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable. So excited to share what I have learned over the last couple of years with you guys as well.
I actually think Hannah and I experienced our first holiday break at the same time, because I remember we were both so amazed that, like, we're not going to work, but they're going to pay us.
Exactly.
It's very exciting.
It was a bonding moment for sure.
Yes. And Hannah is going to go ahead and go over some group agreements for us before we get started today.
Yeah, and just a little background on group agreements. We use these when we're working with students or with staff, just to make sure that we're creating a space where everyone feels safe and comfortable. So we would just invite you to join us in agreeing on the following things during the rest of our time here today. So the first rule we keep is Vegas. We probably won't need this one as much today, but if you ever use these, this is a rule. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? So if someone shares personal information, we just ask that that information is kept to ourselves and kept confidential. This is going to be an interactive training, and so you always have the right to pass. We want to make sure. And don't yuck my yum is just not hating on something that someone else likes. And I think one of the most important rules or agreements that we have today would be to just keep an open mind and keep that open perspective as we go throughout our time.
Thanks so much. And did any other, we could drop those in the chat, or you could just feel free to share any other agreements we feel like we might need to agree upon before we move forward today. All right, fantastic. So we're going to kind of start off with kind of some basic information before we head into some vocab that we'll take a look at in just a moment.
So we would like to, well, this will be the following one, but we want to go over pronouns that we may have a student use. So he, him, and his, she, her, and hers, they, them, and theirs, and then ze, her, zer, hers, and zers, or they. And with that, we'll give you guys a little bit to look over that, but we would like to invite you guys to change your Zoom names to your name, but then also add your pronouns so that we know what pronouns you would prefer to use.
Yes, and also, if you'll notice at the bottom of this slide with the pronouns, there's a link to a website called mypronouns.org, which is a really great website to visit if you have more questions about maybe about pronouns and why those are important to be aware of as we're working with folks. That's a really great website that really explains that in a very easy to understand manner. So perfect.
So these are just the steps. If you guys never changed your name before, you can hover over your name in Zoom and then select more, and then you can rename it. Like I said, we just ask that you put your first name and last name and then the pronouns that you would like to use.
And you can look at either of ours for examples or several other folks who already came to the meeting with pronouns. Excellent. We'll leave that up for just a couple more seconds, but I'm also going to copy and paste those directions into the chat as we go forward in case you want to refer back and do that in just a moment. There we go. All right, so while you all are doing that, we're going to also ask you to share maybe in another way. So on this collaboration board, which as you can see, you can just you can type text into the box at the bottom, or add an image by clicking the image, and then you can just do like a quick Google search for image. But we would love for you all to, again, respond with your pronouns and something that you never leave the house without.
And I would just like to add, I think this is a good activity because sometimes people aren't sure or it's one great way to get to know.
I think you're breaking up just a bit, Hannah. What I think Hannah was covering, yeah, is that sometimes this is a good activity because pairing something as personal as pronouns with something as fun as just like, or nonchalant as what you never leave the house without makes it a little bit less of a risk. And also there's, depending on your own comfort level, you could also, depending on how you get this from students, it's just a great way to, or anyone that we're working with. As we move on later and talk about maybe some common practices, starting off meetings in this way with sharing pronouns without chapstick. Yes, I love it. Just makes a really comfortable space for people to share those. And when we ask everyone to share pronouns, we take a step away from that belief that we should be able to identify someone identify someone's gender simply by looking at them. Excellent. We'll wait just a couple of minutes for a couple more responses. Lots of cell phones. A corkscrew. I love it. Yes, SPF. That's so important. All right, and we're going to go ahead for the sake of time and just move forward. So other than pronouns, there's a few other things we're going to look at, but I'll let Hannah explain this.
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me now. If not, I'm sure James or Dea will hop in. But this is just some of the vocab that we'll be using today. So if you want to go ahead and try your hand at matching the vocab with the definition, just so we can make sure we're all on the same page of understanding what all this vocabulary means. All you'll do is, so you'll click like the word you want to match, and then you click the definition that you think correlates with that word. So if you want to go ahead and take just a few minutes to fill out that matching, make sure we're all on the same page.
Looks like we have several folks drawing close to matching all 7 of those. Fantastic. And as you all are finishing these, okay, several people. I started to give shout outs to like the first person, which I still think, shout out to Heather, I think it was you. The several of us are starting to finish that up. So these terms, as we start to look at these today, again, the focus of this meeting being how we can have an increased awareness of the identities that we ourselves, as well as our colleagues, coworkers, students, folks we serve, are bringing to a space. And just by being more aware of those and how they impact the way we personally kind of navigate the world, can help us understand how we can create a more welcoming environment for folks in the workplace or school. We'll go for it. It looks like many of us have matched those up. Again, those words will be coming back. So looks like we're off to a great start. So this PDF is something that for a brief time, I told a little bit of kind of a white lie when we started. This is my 6th year teaching here, but also I did have a 4-month stint where I left to work as the education coordinator at Indiana Youth Group, which is like a local LGBTQ youth group. And one of my jobs there was to go to schools and kind of do these trainings with both students and staff. And something, this is a tool that was made by folks that are credited down here at the bottom. But as a way for us to start to think, I think largely what we can take away from this slide is, or this activity, is the difference, if nothing else, the difference in gender identity and gender expression. Again, the whole idea of sharing our pronouns like we did at the beginning of this meeting, and hopefully we can, as a network, start to incorporate more, is that the understanding that the way that someone is choosing to express their identity and their gender may be different than how they identify than what we would typically attribute to that. So, and the way this activity is designed, and this is something that I've used with like high schoolers all the way to, like I said, staff, but we kind of have these 5 areas, and the language that's used here is very specific. There used to be an older tool called the genderbread person, but that a little bit perpetuated a bit of a binary. But on this activity, which we're going to ask you all to do here in just a moment, if you feel comfortable, is the end here, you'll see is like the little circle would kind of be like, if you were to select there or make a mark there, that would kind of say that like not at all, right? All the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is like continuing forward, like the most. So when we think of gender identity, for example, which is how I identify, I think for myself and my own identity, right? Like I would be all the way over here with male. And then because that's my identity for myself, I would probably, be over here closer towards the left side and use like circles for female or other, which could include a list of things down at the bottom. I don't want to, it's an exhaustive list, but they did a nice job of summing that up at the bottom. Then the next thing is gender expression. So here we start to think about like how you choose to express that gender. And so for myself, like if I'm looking at this, I think obviously as far as gender expression myself, I'd probably fall closer to the right side on masculine, but I certainly wouldn't be all the way negative on feminine, because I certainly think the way that I express my identity may not be considered traditionally masculine. So we can fall a couple places on one or more of these. Anyway, from like apps, from like no to the end of the spectrum that's more towards I'm more agreeing with that. And then we have sex assigned at birth. This term is something that I think we refer to in our quick tips at the end, is really great language to use in general when we're speaking of folks. Sometimes we'll say things like biological sex or things like that, all of which can be just very problematic language that can send the message to an individual that their identity is something less than actual. So when we use the phrase sex assigned at birth, we are acknowledging that as is in our culture, right? We assign a gender, a sex at birth, based off of a number of things. And then the last two sections are pretty self-explanatory. Physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to, again, all the way from 0 to the other end of the spectrum. And emotionally attracted to, last time someone asked a really great question about like, oh, where would friends fall? And I think that's kind of the point of this emotionally attracted to section. We could also say that, right, our friends fall into those categories. I'm someone who tends to say that, you know, most of my friends are fall into one of these top two, you know, men and women more binary categories, or maybe most of my friends fall into kind of what they have used as other, which is, again, they kind of describe at the bottom very well. What we're going to ask you all to do now, and feel free to ask any questions as we're doing it, is to, on your own screen, which the only person who would see this would be like you and myself, to just feel free to kind of mark where you feel that you would fall using the gender unicorn. And in doing so, think about how that informs kind of the way that you navigate spaces and the way that you show up with the people around you. Yeah, we'll take just a few minutes. Thanks for those of you that are participating. Yes, and as folks are starting to submit those, again, which I said at the beginning, but I'll repeat, I think that it's, if nothing else, I know this can be like a lot to process, especially if it's something that we don't, you know, often talk about or engage in discussion about. I think the big takeaway from this activity, like I said, and even for like staff at schools, is just understanding that difference in gender identity and gender expression, if nothing else, because that sets you up immediately upon creating a new learning environment, leading a team, a training, whatever that may be. That's going to set you up to create a more inclusive environment. Understanding that if we want to properly identify people, we have to ask and share. A few of us are finishing up, so I will let you do that. We have some time, so we'll finish. Take just a few more seconds. All right, so we are going to go ahead, move forward to our next activity. Again, thanks for sharing. And the vocab matching activity is free within Nearpod. Yeah, there's a free version. Really, the only problem is you run out of space, which is how they sell the paid version. So as we start to think about these identities, we have, with this poll, we would just love to see what folks say about how you would rate your own awareness of intersectionality. Because as we looked in that last activity, none of us are just one thing. And so we have, you know, an understanding all the way from like, I have a basic understanding maybe, or not at all the way to like, I feel like I could teach this to someone. I will share our results here in just a moment as those are rolling in. I apologize, Hannah, was there anything you wanted to add about intersectionality before we move forward?
No, I think we kind of wanted to get a baseline and see how you guys felt or what you knew about intersectionality. As James mentioned earlier, we do not just we definitely felt like as we were making this presentation, we couldn't talk about gender identity without talking about how other identities intersect with that. So after we show video just about what intersectionality is, and I think a little bit about the woman who first kind of coined that term and presented that idea.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like most of us, just to share with you all, it looks like most of us are coming in with a basic understanding of this knowledge and how it applies to those around us. And so that's great. So we would love you all to bring that into the conversation. We do have a quick video here for folks who, to give us, again, a very kind of condensed version of what intersectionality is. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the option that will allow you to play this on your own screen. But Dea, since you are sharing, would you mind, and recording, would you mind playing it on your end for everyone?
Yeah, definitely.
And you should be able to do that now.
Intersectionality. Have you heard this word before? Even if you have, you might not know what it means. Let's take a look at it. The first part's easy enough. Intersection, a place where things come together. Intersectionality refers to the reality that we all have multiple identities that intersect to make us who we are. It also gives us a way to talk about oppressions and privileges that overlap and reinforce each other. This term dates back to the 1980s and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. She noticed that we didn't have an effective way to talk about how the experiences of Black women are different from the experiences of Black men and of white women. How? Black women endure both gender discrimination and racial discrimination. Over the last 30 years, scholars, educators, and activists have expanded the use of the word intersectionality to talk about identities beyond race and gender. Let's look at a few examples. Jerry has a disability and his family lives below the poverty line. He is the oldest of 10, which requires him to do a lot of caregiving and sometimes keeps him out of school. No one in the school counseling office has talked to Jerry or his parents about his plans for after graduation. He has applied for several jobs, but never gets called back. Fatima is Muslim and recently came to the United States from Somalia. She finds that many people at her school make assumptions about her values and abilities before they speak to her. Many of her classmates think she shouldn't be at their school at all. Greta comes from an affluent family. Both her parents and grandparents went to college, and her father owns a successful business. She doesn't think about her identity very often, but she does think of herself as someone who will go to college and get a good job once she graduates. Think about Greta's situation as opposed to Fatima's or Jerry's. Fatima and Jerry are members of marginalized groups. They don't get to choose whether or not to think about their identities. Greta, on the other hand, can ignore intersectionality if she wants to. Life isn't the same for everyone, even for people who share identity characteristics. By adopting an intersectional lens, we have a better opportunity to understand why and to change the institutions that help and harm us based on who we are. Want to learn more? Read our story, Teaching at the Intersections, in the summer 2016 issue of Teaching Tolerance magazine.
Thank you, Dea. And Hannah, was there anything else that we wanted to follow up with about this idea of intersectionality and our kind of intersecting identities before we moved forward?
No, I think it's just good for us all to have that kind of basic understanding as we move through the next sections of our presentation.
Wonderful. And as always, guys, should you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat or just ask at any time. I think that we certainly have space for that. But Dea will go ahead and walk us through our next portion of which is focusing on implicit bias.
Yes, so we felt like if we have to talk, or with a conversation of intersectionality and gender identity, we also need to focus on implicit bias. And for a lot of us, sometimes talking about implicit bias makes us feel uncomfortable, but we really want to make sure that if we are trying to create that safe space for our students, for staff, or wherever we are, that we focus on how we perceive things. So implicit bias is defined by the Kirwan Institute as attitudes or stereotypes that are activated unconsciously and involuntarily. So they can be things that we were raised upon, maybe how we were taught to look at things, ideologies that maybe our families or whoever we grew up with had. And there is a great test that I highly recommend. It's at this website at the bottom, and it will give you several tests to kind of unpack that biases that you may have. And I think with this, going into the test, I want to just remind you guys that I took this and I was kind of shocked at some of the biases that I had, and I didn't even know that I had them, but it was good for me to recognize that it kind of fits that definition, right? The unconscious biases that we create. And it can come from different directions. And so I just, want to remind you guys as you go into taking this test, if you want to take it, just, don't be hard on yourself, give yourself some grace, because a lot of these could be things that we don't realize that we're doing.
Yeah, and I think also for many of us, also taking these tests on the Harvard website, it sometimes when you get those results about possible biases that you may have, that you're not aware of, sometimes it does, upon reflection though, kind of help you understand maybe the way that you react in certain situations. And maybe you don't have the answers on how to change that yet, but just being aware is a great first step.
And I think also too, it's the way that we interact with our peers, with our colleagues, with our students as well. So it allows us to create, that knowledge behind that of I'm, like James said, reacting to the situation. Why am I reacting to the situation, and how can I act differently? And I don't think the expectation when you start, unpacking your biases is that you're going to learn all of it right at once, but definitely opening yourself up to, doing the research and learning more about these biases that you may have, and kind of unpacking that is a great start.
And so for an activity, kind of one of our final activities is this is a game that back in the before times I used to do with students, and we would take all these different identity signs, things that vocab we looked at the beginning, right? Gender identity, gender expression, socioeconomic status, and we kind of just paste those up around the room, walk students through a series of questions. They would walk to the one. So we for this year adapted this the best we could to an online environment. Doesn't lend itself as well to conversation, but I think we would love if anyone was willing to throw out any thoughts that you have as we go through this activity. But the way this will work is it's through a series of polls. We're going to ask some questions, and then you'll have the option to choose sometimes just one or sometimes multiple identity signs or identity markers, depending on your response to that question. And the purpose of this is to explore our own relationships with our own varying identities. Because sometimes just taking a look at how our own identities kind of intersect and interplay with each other can help us understand how a colleague maybe that we struggle to understand, or a student that we struggle to support, what they might be bringing to the table daily as they navigate the world with their own identities. So we have for our first question, and I believe this one, it'll tell you all at the bottom if you can pick one or more. I think this one is just one, but for this, if you could just select the part of your identity that you're the most aware of on a daily basis. And again, those go anywhere from ability to age to gender expression, identity, ethnicity. What do you believe as you navigate the world you're most aware of in your interactions with others? Right, about half of us have answered. I'll take another second before we share our results. And with more than half of us answering, we can see here that our the category that most of us are most aware of is race, and then closely followed by gender expression, with age as a close third. I think we were surprised that that was so high last time. Not surprised, but we found that interesting. In the chat, sorry, I'm not sure why. Maybe as we go forward to the next one, tell us, John, if that's still happening. Our next question.
Our next question, I believe, is also, you're going to select one answer. So select the answer that the part of my identity that I'm least aware of on a daily basis. So the part of your identity that you are least aware of on a daily basis. Looks like we have some other people.
So sometimes this happens. Make sure that I did it the other day. You're not trying to bubble on the shared Zoom screen, but instead trying to bubble on the Nearpod.
And I did just reshare the Nearpod link. Yeah. Take a couple more seconds. James, does it look like we have some?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share. It looks like most people have answered now. So looks like here's where, as a group, we're weighing in. Just, yeah, very interesting. I would have to agree. I myself also don't oftentimes daily think about my immigration status.
Mm.
All right, very telling. Okay, and we'll move forward to the next one.
Okay, for this one, it is the part of my identity that was most emphasized or important in my family growing up. So what part of your identity, was a bigger deal for you growing up? And I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background. She's going crazy today. I think as we're going through these questions, a great reflection too that we, James Hanna and I talked about was kind of putting yourself in your student shoes, or your colleagues, whoever you're wanting, if you do this activity with, and just thinking like, how would they answer? I think that's definitely impactful to kind of create that relationship of how you feel versus how, the people that we're working with feel as well.
Yeah, and it looks like with most folks answering, we are coming in with the majority being socioeconomic status. I think with the close second of ability and race, I think those would certainly be, speaking of results, if you are at the Excel Center, right, results that students may also identify with. I think those top three may certainly be in there as well. So for question number 4, this is, I believe, again, one. No, this one we can select one or more answers. So you could do multiples here, but the part of your identity that you wish you knew more about. And again, for this one, you can select multiple options. All right, and with most of us answering, for the sake of time, a few, we'll go ahead and share. Our top 3 here are interesting, I think. We have, of course, coming out the top, ethnicity, and then race and ability with the other 2. And I think those, it was age. Oh, that's right, they're very close. These all coming in together. Age and gender expression, same on that one. Very good. Okay. Next question. So for this one, we would just want to go ahead. For this one is the part of your identity that maybe in daily interactions or commonly, you feel that makes you feel the most discriminated against.
And for this one, you can pick more than one.
And with most folks answering, I believe these are the exact same top 3 that we had the last time we did this presentation, being race, age, and gender identity. Again, for those of us, it's depending on what community we serve and where we are with Goodwill. Again, thinking about kind of the commonality between this and what some of the folks we serve might also pick as well, because I think these are some very common identity markers that folks can at times obviously feel discriminated against. So thinking back to implicit bias, myself obviously being a cisgender white male, I have to think about times when maybe I have contributed to that in the past. And conversely,
this one is the part of my identity that provides me the most privilege. And for this one, you can only select one.
all right, and with most folks answering, I believe we also have again the same top 3 from last time, being race, gender identity, and socioeconomic status, with a large majority being race, which is certainly good to see that this is something we're thinking about this year as we do the work that we do, which leads to our last question, which the part of your identity that you feel is difficult to discuss with others who identify differently. The part of your identity that you just maybe don't like talking about with folks who also don't have that same identity marker. And here again, with most of us answering, we're seeing our top three being race, socioeconomic status, with the bottom three coming in all together of ability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This one I think is very important to think about as we are attempting to make connections with the folks that we serve. It sometimes feels just so natural to let folks know that we are there to like advocate for them, for whatever the case might be. But keeping in mind that there are some things maybe that folks just, you might not be the person to have that discussion with. And that's perfectly fine, because some things folks, students, faculty or colleagues may feel a little more comfortable sharing with folks who identify similarly. So thank you all for participating there. Again, the goal of that being how we can think about how our own identities kind of intersect. And so what we'd like to ask you all is, like, after thinking about intersectionality and taking a look at our own kind of identity markers or identity signs, how would you rate your understanding of intersectionality after these activities? All right, and we will move on, but it looks like I'll have to go back and look at our percentage before. I believe this looks like more of us now have a solid and or basic understanding of intersectionality and how our own identities affect our own navigation of the world, as well as the folks that we work for, which even having a basic understanding is exactly the hope for this presentation and the time we have, which is why we have made what Dea will introduce to you.
Yes, so we created, well, by we mean Hannah created this wonderful graphic for you guys. It's just Gender and Identity 101, and it's just fast facts that you guys can keep in your offices or in your classrooms that maybe you can refer back to. So it goes anywhere from talking about pronouns and sharing them to, you know, intersectionality, what maybe gendered language when we speak to groups to avoid, or language in formal documents that we use that maybe we want to try to avoid as well, to changing, you know, your pronouns in your email signature. That may not seem like a lot, but that can definitely go a long way when interacting with someone else. I think that sends, you know, the message that that we are, you know, we want to create that safe space with those people. And just more information that you guys can hopefully use, like I said, with working with the people that we work with, you know, whether that's our students or our colleagues or just anyone else. We really hope that you guys can take use of this graphic and, like I said, have it in your classrooms or in your offices or wherever you're currently located.
Yeah, and I'm going to also just put that in the chat. You'll have access to it because we'll send it out with the self-paced version, but also I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat in case we want that now. Something on this that I think is really important. Again, if as you're starting this work, which as hopefully we are, that bottom left one that Dea has on her screen right now, as you're working on folks' pronouns and names, you're going to mess up. It's something we all do. Something that's really important. Another quick takeaway just to remember in these interactions is when you do mess up, just correct yourself, thank them, and move on. When we overreact and draw more attention to the situation, we not only draw a lot of attention to a situation that a person probably doesn't want, but we also are putting individuals in a position where they have to say it's okay. And maybe it's not, they don't have to feel that it's okay, but just apologizing and moving forward without further embarrassing someone is going to go a long way in building trust. And we have, with our last 2 minutes, we would love to get some feedback from you all. In our last, I forgot about our other image that we added. This is another really great image that also Hannah found. Hannah and these useful things. Something to think about as language to avoid and language we might use, right? This top one being super important, referring to someone as transgendered as opposed to just being transgender. Using words like transitioned and assigned instead of born as, and presented as instead of was. So yeah, another great image, which again, you all can access from the self-paced version. Just something quick that you could take with you. And now, the last thing that we would want to know from you all in our last minute, if you would be kind enough to answer before you head out, is how could the information that we covered today be beneficial to you in your role? And what topics, if any, would you like to learn more about? And again, we would love that feedback. And that's what we have for you today. I really appreciate you all spending some time with us today to talk about how we might, as an organization, move forward in creating some welcoming spaces for all the